Toby, you choose to dress in conformity with the Jewish laws of modesty for women. You cover your hair in public, you wear long sleeves, you wear long skirts. Do you ever feel that people outside your circle prejudge you based on your sartorial choices? And if so, how do you deal with it?
If people were really happy where they were, they wouldn't be so resentful about what you represented. They wouldn't care. It was almost like I was an anathema when I first came to New Haven. I was like, what, like, who are you? You're just setting us back. You, Toby Hecht. And I felt really sorry because I didn't feel that way. And I felt sorry that they felt that way.
I wore pantsuits for a long time when I was a younger attorney. Then I reached a point as I was moving into supervisory roles where I decided I was going to wear dresses and skirts and shoes and show up in all my femininity wherever I go, because I think it's important not to hide that.
Okay. Never done this.
First off, thank you for coming. My name is Amber Kenan. I'm one of the hostesses with Tal Kenan, so thank you for being here. I'm just going to introduce our moderator, who is going to do a wonderful job. So thank you for joining us this evening to discuss a topic that has been a source, I'm going to put on my glasses because I can't see anything without, sorry, that's age. Source of constant debate and concern and inspiration for countless women around the world. I'm glad to see so many women here today, so thank you. When I spoke to Shmuley and Toby about hosting this evening with Tal, we immediately spoke about the delicate balance act women are facing today. On one hand, building exciting careers and meaningful careers, and that's wonderful and beautiful. We spoke about that a little bit earlier. And building beautiful homes and beautiful families, and that's a balancing act that we face, and it's challenging, and it's a topic that touches lives of millions, and I believe it's crucial to address openly and honestly. Finding that balance is tricky, and can be incredibly challenging, and often really eluding. It's not a one-size-fits-all, and it's really a deeply personal journey that a woman must navigate according to her own unique circumstances and personal aspirations. And I'd like to start by acknowledging that there's no perfect solution. I think we all see that there is no perfect solution. But the struggle to balance motherhood and a career is a universal experience, and one that transcends geographical boundaries, religious and cultural differences, and socioeconomic status. And I think if I've learned one kernel of truth in my life, is that there's an opportunity cost to everything. And we must take that and must be courageous in those costs and bear those costs. And that's really it. So with that said, this is a closed door session, and we will speak to this bluntly. To lead this in this exciting evening, I'm honored to introduce you to Adina Storch. You're going to blush because I'm going to go into a sort of an introduction of you. So be ready. So Adina is not merely a legal luminary. She's a trailblazer, a philanthropist, an advocate for change, and a true exemplar of excellence in all aspects of her life. Her journey inspires us to reach for highest peaks, showing that with dedication, innovation, and a heart full of compassion, one can truly make a difference. As a senior vice president, general counsel, and corporate secretary of Global Industrial Company, did I say that right? Adina brings a wealth of experience and expertise to her role. Her illustrious career has spanned diverse sectors, from real estate investment trusts to international capital markets, making her a versatile and respected authority in the legal field. She earned her law degree from the Yale Law School, and while she's here, where she served as an editor of the Yale Law Journal. Her undergraduate years were marked by exceptional achievements, graduating summa cum laude with distinction in English. Adina's journey is marked by a diverse range of experiences. Before her remarkable in-house roles, she honed her legal acumen as an international capital markets lawyer at Sherman & Sterling in Paris. Her legal prowess further blossomed as a commercial litigation partner at the prestigious Kasowitz Benson law firm in New York. It's not over. Adina's journey is not only confined to the legal sphere. Before embarking on the legal career, she made her mark as a television producer, is that correct? On a nationally syndicated news show. Additionally, she was on the math faculty at a prestigious New York City private school. But it doesn't end there. Her achievements extend beyond her professional life, and her commitment to empowering women and individuals with disabilities is evident in her philanthropic endeavors. Adina has consistently championed causes aimed at elevating these groups, embodying the values of empathy and advocacy. Her impact transcends the boardroom as she serves on the board of directors of Medical Facilities Corporation, a publicly traded Canadian company specializing in hospitals and surgery centers across the United States. Her contributions extend to key committees within the organization, reflecting her dedication to governance and excellence. Her remarkable journey has garnered recognition from peers and organizations alike, and in 2023, she was honored with the Women Influence and Power in Law Award for Innovative Leadership by Corporate Counsel. Her trailblazing role as a strong woman leader and community role model earned her recognition from the Girls Inc., an organization promoting leadership skills among young girls from underserved communities. She has received too many top attorney awards to enumerate here, too many, but I'll just mention that she has twice been awarded the Top General Counsel Award by the First Chair Organization. Beyond her professional accolades, of which there are many, Adina finds home in New York, where she resides with her two beautiful teenage daughters who are here, and husband. And her dedication to both family and community underscores her value of balance and holistic success. And she is here today surrounded by family. So thank you for coming, family, Adina, and you're in good hands, and I'll let you take it from there. And I want to remind you about the phones.
Oh, my goodness. That's good luck.
Is it?
Oh, yeah.
Spilled
water? Yes. Well, thank you, Amber, for that lovely introduction. If nothing else, it made me feel quite old. Well, good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I want to welcome you to this evening's panel discussion on women in leadership, sponsored by Shabtai and graciously hosted by Amber and Tal Keenan. Thank you for having us. Tonight, we have the privilege of audience with two remarkable women leaders, Vanessa Roberts-Avery and Toby Hecht, and it's my great privilege and honor to introduce them to you. Vanessa Roberts-Avery is the 54th U.S. Attorney for the District of Connecticut, nominated by President Biden and sworn into office in May 2022. She is the first African-American female in history to hold this position. Prior to her appointment, she had a distinguished career of service and justice at both the state and federal level. Ms. Avery was the Associate Attorney General and Chief of the Division of Enforcement and Public Protection at the Connecticut Office of the Attorney General. Prior to that, she led litigation and investigations for the state of Connecticut in the areas of antitrust, opioids, fraud, consumer protection, child protection, environment, and civil rights, just to name a few. Ms. Avery served on the Attorney General's Litigation Management Committee, the Connecticut Bar Association Policing Task Force, and led the COVID-19 Fraud Task Force. Ms. Avery previously served as an AUSA in the District of Connecticut in civil fraud, a litigation attorney in private practice at the firms McCarter & English and Cummings & Lockwood, and a trial attorney with the Department of Justice Civil Division in Washington, D.C. Ms. Avery is a graduate of Yale College and the Georgetown University Law Center. She's a New Haven native and a graduate of the New Haven Public Schools. Ms. Avery is married and has two sons. Please join me in welcoming U.S. Attorney Vanessa Roberts-Avery. Toby Hecht is the director of Shabtai and the mother of 7 children. Yes, you heard that right, 7 children. She has 5 boys and 2 girls ranging in age from 10 to 25. She is from Seattle, Washington, is the 5th of 12 children herself, and has been living in New Haven for 26 years. During those nearly 3 decades, Toby has provided, alongside her husband, Rabbi Shmuley Hecht, spiritual guidance, philosophical and moral debate, and life coaching to 2 generations of Yale students, faculty, and alumni, as well as students at other universities where Shabtai has a presence. In the salons and around the Shabbos table, Toby and her husband Shmuley have created a sacred space for intellectual honesty, intercultural exchange, tolerance, and learning. She is renowned for her wisdom without being judgmental, her quiet truths, her righteousness, and not least of all, her incredible cooking. Please join me in welcoming Toby Hecht. It's my great privilege to accompany you on this exploratory journey this evening. Now, there are no wrong answers here. You are both decidedly beacons of success, both as women and as leaders. But each of you has chosen a slightly different path, and purposefully so. And it's that I'd like to explore. So I'd like to begin tonight's discussion by referencing an earlier talk that you gave, Madam U.S. Attorney, in front of a convocation of Yale students at Shabtai in New Haven earlier this year. Now, I had the privilege to review a video of that evening, and there was a moment in the night that was truly show-stopping, and I don't know if you remember what it was, but you had just finished giving a professional overview of your journey, which culminated in your appointment as U.S. Attorney, when you paused and you said, well, everyone has their own version of professional stump speech. But you can't really know a person until you know their character and the personal events in their life that shaped them. And with that, you proceeded to give a very personal narrative of your journey, the consequential moments of your life, the intentionality with which you carved out prioritization of your family and your children while building this big career. And I can tell you from that moment forward, you could hear a pin drop in the room. So I'd like to begin tonight's discussion at precisely that place, at the crossroads where Vanessa Avery, the U.S. Attorney, meets Vanessa Avery, the wife, the mother, and the family matriarch, in asking you this first question, which is, how do you define what it means to be a leader, and specifically a woman leader? How are the two definitions different, if at all? Madam U.S. Attorney.
Okay. Well, let's start first. You can refer to me as Vanessa. We're having a conversation here today, so we'll drop the titles. I really appreciate the opportunity to get to know some of the folks who are in the audience here. I think leadership is, I don't think it's different based on whether you're a man or a woman. I think leadership is, at its core, just about connecting with people and inspiring people to a common goal. And it's something that I hope, I had a chance to speak to some folks when we were conversing earlier, and I think someone said, it sounds like you're trying to convince us all to be attorneys. That may be a subtle goal that I have. But really, I just wanted to connect with people, to get to know them, and to really understand what is it that inspires you, because I think everybody in this room is probably looking for the same thing in terms of wanting to leave a positive impact on the world. There's so many negative things that happen. And so when you can connect people towards those common goals, I think that's what leadership is all about. And I think there are a lot of stereotypes about whether women can hold certain leadership roles, especially in industries like the one I'm in, law enforcement, being one that's very male-dominated. But I think the answer is obvious that yes, we can.
Woo. Well said, well said. So Toby, you have become a respected advisor to countless generations of leaders at Yale and on other campuses, and particularly women. You have conducted your life informed by a robust and rich tradition of morals, spirituality, and choices that have helped you act as a compass for others who seek you out. And so from your vantage point, I ask you the same question. What does leadership mean to you, and particularly woman leadership, and how do the two definitions differ if they do?
Thank you, Adina, and I just want to thank everybody for being here tonight, especially Vanessa. Thank you so much for coming down, and I want to thank Amber and Tal Kanon for hosting this event, and all of you for being here. It's really an honor and a privilege to sit up here with both of you incredibly successful and incredible women. So it's interesting. I'll push back a little bit, Vanessa, on what you said in regards to women and leadership specifically. So, you know, I'm a traditional Jewish woman. When I look at inspiration for something like this, like where do I find leadership or how do I define leadership, I look to my history, and in specific Jewish history, and whether or not you believe that the Bible, or the Old Testament, or the Torah is divine or an anthropological look at an ancient civilization, there's a lot to inform us today about how we live or how we can live. And when I think about leadership, the first person that actually comes to mind is the quintessential leader. We think of Moses, at least I think of Moses, because he defines, he has all these qualities that we would like to see in a leader. The humility, he's humble, he's unassuming. He's like plucked out of the plains of Midian, and he's asked to be a messenger for God, and at the same time, he has to straddle this very often precarious line of being a very fierce advocate for the people. And we see that in Egypt is like this first kind of historic opportunity to lead in mass. And so when I think of leadership, Moses is this eternal image of someone who defines leadership. However, we need to look deeper, because how does Moses come to even be? And if we look before Moses becomes the leader, we have to see his sister Miriam. And Miriam is this woman, young girl, who defies her situation, her circumstances, one, by telling her parents that despite Pharaoh's decree to kill all baby boys, and the parents who decide, well, maybe the best thing to do going forward is to just divorce and we won't have children. She says, how can you do this? She says, there's no reason if we can still have, if girls can still survive, we need to move forward. And so this young woman from a very young age, as a slave in Egypt, says to her parents and says, we're going to rethink this edict, this tyrant. And from this, we see a whole kind of thread that happens in Egypt, where the end of it is we have Miriam, we have Batya, the Egyptian princess, who then plucks Moses out of the water, for those of you familiar with the story. And then Moses lives and becomes the Moses as we know him today. But on top of that, we see something very profound happening in Egypt for the first time, where we see women in mass galvanizing a nation. And it is said that because of women, because of the righteous women, the Jews leave Egypt. And so we see this very interesting, powerful, impressive style of individual leadership, and then also this collective of women. And where does this come from? Where do these women get this strength? And if we go dig deeper and we go back to the source, we see that actually inherently from the first woman, Adam and Chava, not Eve, Chava. And Chava means life. And in fact, in the text it says Chava is Em Kol Chai, mother of all life. So she's given us a very significant title. And not mother of all living people, but mother of all life. And that kind of carries a lot of interesting weight to it. And what we learn in Jewish tradition is that actually when Chava was created, she was created with an inherent sense of Bina, which is a Bina Yisera, an extra understanding, like a keen perception of the world, to be able to see further and wider and deeper. And as a result, all of women thereafter have been imbued and can embody this very significant style of living. And it doesn't necessarily, we see it persistently throughout this storyline through the Bible. So we see, obviously, the matriarchs. I mean, these are very powerful women, and through their choices, and maybe they were small or big, changed the trajectory of their families, and thus even the Jewish nation. And we see it perpetually, and they're not necessarily the same. And we're talking, let's say, one of my favorite stories, if you don't mind, I'm just going to say one little story, and then we'll move on. But there's this phenomenal a story about the wife of a man named On ben Peles, and she is the wife of the chieftain of the Shevet of Reuven, and it's actually not in the text, but it is in the oral tradition records in the Talmud in Sanhedrin that there is this rebellion. And for those familiar with the rebellion of Korach, who he's a wise man and he is a spiritual man, but he's also he's decided that he's going to rebel against Moses' authority, Moses and Aaron's authority, Moses' his brother. And he starts to galvanize men in his district, and his neighbor is the tribe of Reuven. So Owen Ben Pellis gets caught up in this rebellion, and his wife says to him, okay, his wife is not even named in the text. She's the wife of Owen Ben Pellis. She says, this is not a good idea. What are you doing? And he said, well, what should I do? I'm kind of caught up in this. And she says, you know what, honey, why don't you go take a nap? She sees like the neighbors are kind of stirring. They're coming to get him because he was like second in command. That was what he signed up for. She says, you know what, I'm going to take care of it. And he goes and he takes a nap. She gives him a little, and she says, she decides that she's going to sit at the front and in almost like a Rosa Parks moment. She sits there and stages the first sit-in we ever see in history. She sits there, and what does she do? She uncovers her hair. And according to Jewish law, a man who is not married to a woman cannot see her hair. So one by one, the neighbors come by to recruit the second in command, and they're like, they're God-fearing men. They may be staging rebellion, but they're God-fearing, and so they turn around one by one, and thus she saves her husband. And the Talmud records that this amazing line that just resonates over time. Chachmas nashim bun sabai, so the wisdom of women build the house. She's not even named, but this trend of women being empowered in kind of what we see as micro choices that really shape and change from Miriam, the Egyptian slave, to Batia, the Egyptian princess, across time to Esther in palaces of Persia, to Eastern Europe, Sarah Schneer, a woman, a divorcee who decides that Jewish women need to be educated in order for them to continue to connect to their heritage in the aftermath of the Enlightenment period. And this is the school that my grandmother, years later on the shores of America, she attends as a first-generation American. So we see this constant thread of women taking charge in very different ways, kind of embodying this first inherent character trait and quality that was gifted to Chava. So when I think of leadership and men and women, how they lead, I think this is how I would say there are singular people who take leadership positions. Women can always lead. It's just a matter if they choose to. And they are really endowed with that quality. So that's how I see women and leadership. So, interesting.
Very good answer. I find it interesting, but both of you picked up on this theme of connectedness as giving force to leadership, however you define it. And ultimately, motherhood is the ultimate form of connectedness, isn't it? It is an extension of yourself to have a child. And so I'd like to turn the next question to that topic. Ms. Avery, Vanessa, you've spoken unapologetically about your commitment to being a present mother, with all that entails, with soccer matches, school plays, orthodontist visits, you name it. Has being a working mother, with all the juggling that entails, been a net attribute or net handicap to your career? And explain.
Definitely a net attribute. Being a working mother, I don't know if there are any working parents, mothers, fathers in the audience, but I think working mothers in particular, especially when your children are young, you must learn to juggle. I would have a joke when my children were very young and still in diapers. Sometimes I would show up for that morning meeting, say it started at 8:30 or 9 o'clock in the morning, and you're rushing to get there, leaving the house, leaving the children, maybe dropping them off at daycare first. And oftentimes I would get there thinking I was going to be late, but showing up and being one of the first people there, and looking around the room later as people are arriving and seeing mostly men walking in, although some men are very active parents as well, so I'll put that out there. But I would often think, I wonder how many of these people changed 2 stinky diapers before they left for the office today. And I still made it there on time. It teaches you, being a working mother, teaches you how to balance those things and to be precise about and intentional about your calendar. Now that my children are older, there are other things. You mentioned some of them, soccer matches, sport matches, performances at the school. There are things that your children do when they're young that you want to make sure that you're present for, because they matter. When we all think back to our childhoods, those are the moments that matter for you when your parents were present. And so how do you make sure that you can show up when you have very busy schedules? Well, if you have enough advance notice, you can put it on the calendar and you make it an appointment, just like you make everything else an appointment, right? You make it a priority. And so for me, it's been a net attribute in the sense that I have not missed anything in terms of the professional side, but I've been able to add that balance that I need, and it fulfills me, it keeps me going. Having that time with my children, that time to unplug and to leave some of the heaviness of the office at the office.
Well said. Was having kids for you a non-negotiable? Did you ever contemplate not having kids to focus singularly on your career?
Great question. I have always loved children. I was one of the people in my family who was the babysitter growing up, so I've always been surrounded by a lot of cousins. I had nieces and nephews when I was younger, so I always imagined that I would one day have children. I think that there was a time in my career when I realized I had, been working for quite some time. I didn't get married until I was in my 30s. And before I got married, I reached a point in my career where I realized I was on this trajectory, but had not yet been married, not yet obviously started having children, and I wanted to be more intentional about that. I did not want to be at a point of regret where, I waited another 10 years and maybe it never happened. So for me, it was always something that was in the cards. It was always something I wanted to do. And I remember that moment speaking to a young woman who was a mentor of mine, who was a partner at a different firm. This is when I was working in the private sector. And she waited until after she was much older to get married and have children, and had some regrets because she was having some difficulties fertility-wise with having children. And she said to me, if you know that you want to have children, you should not put your personal side on hold. Put the career on hold, because that can wait. There's certain things if you really want to do that. And for me, that was something that I knew I wanted to do at some point, and I just kept it a priority. I think it's important for us to be honest with ourselves about what we want, and if that's what you want, then be intentional about it. Carve out that space. And it does mean, I think Toby talked about this earlier, sometimes you have to have those moments where you're going to give something else up in order to pursue that, and so you have to be honest with yourself about which is more important at that moment in time. Yeah.
Thank you. Now, Toby, was being a stay-at-home mom a non-negotiable for you? Did you ever contemplate taking work outside the home?
So I'm very fortunate that the work that I do almost feels like an extension of my home, in the sense that I was able to be extremely flexible with my hours in some sense, and also be intentional about how I manage my time in the home and at Shabtai as well. And though I don't have a 9-to-5 space that I need to show up at. A lot of it is, anywhere in my home. I'm working all the time, but I was fortunate that I didn't have to show up and check in, and that in some ways I was my own boss, having been part of an organization or joining an organization that I didn't found, but I was slowly becoming a co-director. And so even within that flexibility and kind of this this elasticity that I was privileged to have, and I know that I was, because my friends or my sisters are showing up at very specific times, and I felt that even with that I still had to really manage intentionally more than you would think, because it's so easy to say, I'm going to I'll get a sitter, or I'll miss that event, or it'll be okay, and sometimes they did. And it's an interesting process. I was having children over a number of years. So I got married when I was very young. I was 20, and I had my oldest when I was 21. And so my career of having children spanned, from 21 to 37. So a lot of things changed, and I changed as a mother. And the way I became intentional shifted as my children grew older, and quite frankly, as I evolved as a human being and as a woman and as a mother. So there are still challenges that I face about how much time I devote to work, and it's sometimes when we're off, we're not really off,
Right.
And your kids know that. I'm really smart today, and I am available 24/6, and I tell people that, and I try to be available to people. But there are times that, my phone will be off, and my phone does not come into my room with me. It stays. There's a moment that it just goes away, and so it's still a struggle, believe it or not. Even with the flexibility that I'm privileged to have, it's all how I decide to be intentional and to make sure that I'm present, not just physically, but emotionally and mentally. Does that answer the question?
It certainly does.
Woman's job is endless, but
Endless.
so are the rewards.
That's right. That's right. And would I ever have considered? Sorry to answer that. There was never a moment in time that I could have thought that, maybe I shouldn't have more because it may be overwhelming with what I want to do. So, and I was fortunate because the family that I came from, it was kind of an organic, kind of almost organic understanding of that, what's a priority,
Right.
and what's important.
Right. So you mentioned the 24/7 or 24/6 aspect of being on call as a mom, and it's not always easy to schedule the skinned knees or the meltdowns. They come at the most inopportune times. With all the parts of Sky that women hold up, is it possible? Can women really have it all, or can they have it all at the same time? What say you? Vanessa?
Yes.
Yes.
I think, yes, you can. I remember before I had my oldest son, I was still in private practice. I was working at a law firm, and there were just a handful of women who were in leadership at that time, so a few women partners. And one of the women who I looked up to surprised me when I told her that I was planning to have children. I had just gotten married, and that I was planning to be a primary caregiver of my children, because she had taken a different path. And during her generation, when she made that decision to have children, she also felt compelled to make the decision to either stay home with her children or to have her spouse stay home. And in her case, her husband stayed home with the children, and she focused on the career. And I had a different idea in mind of what motherhood was going to look like for me, and she said, so you want to have your cake and eat it too? Who wants to have cake and not eat it? What's the point? And so, I was disappointed by that sort of reaction, but I was not discouraged from my efforts to figure out what was going to work for me. And I think everybody has to figure out what works for them. Childcare is extremely important for anybody who's going to be a working mother, and it could be your spouse, it could be grandparents, it could be private daycare, it could be live-in daycare, but you have to figure that out for yourself. For me, I knew that I was going to figure something out that allowed me to continue having the career that I love, and also being a mom who was a primary caregiver for the children, because I get so much pleasure out of that, even changing the stinky diapers. So.
Wow.
Great. How about you, Toby? Can women have it all, and can they have it all at the same time?
So I am a big believer in the traditional sense of woman, which is the multi-dimensional role of women. And so yes, I do believe, and I agree with you with everything you said, Vanessa, that women can definitely have both. The question is, and how I always frame it to get like an easier visual, is if you have a plate and what's your entree and your very beloved side dishes that kind of support the entree. And so, I think it's about choices and about choosing where you want to maximize your time and what's important to you. I think today there's a lot of information and a lot of noise that make this question really challenging for young people and young women in particular today, because it seems that it's an either or option. And it's not. Because,
agree.
right, it's not an either or option. This is something that it may mean that you need to be intentional, but before you're even intentional, you really need to say, well, what do I want? And I think that without being able to ask yourself that question, or the fear in asking yourself that question, or the guilt associated with asking yourself that question, leads people on paths, or young women on paths, or maybe all women on paths, to be very uncertain with this concept of, can I have it all? It's not, of course, it's not about, it's a matter of, I wouldn't say compromising, but prioritizing. And once that language changes and we change the narrative of what does it mean to have it all? Does it mean we have to give up one instead of the other? Or does it mean like we're having it all, but like we're not home? And does it mean that someone else is raising my children? Or does it mean I'm not going to take that job? Well, it might. It might mean that you say, well, if being home more is more important to me than making partner, which requires me to be in an office, I don't know, you go 100 hours a week, right? A ridiculous amount of time, right? If you want to be a mom. So the questions are, if you can tune out the noise and say, what do I want? I want to have a family. So family, yes, it's going to be a priority over your career because the amount of energy and that you can't even anticipate. You won't anticipate. All you will know is that it's going to have to take center stage to your life. You won't know exactly what that means until you have kids.
Right.
Right?
And
you
each
won't
child
know.
is different.
And each
And
child
child's
is
needs are
different.
different.
And
Yeah.
each pregnancy is different.
Yes.
And so, and everything that comes with it. So if you're willing to say to yourself, which is an extremely courageous thing to do today, what is it that I want? I'd like to have a family. And I'm going to say that to anybody who asks me. And so, but I also want to utilize the other amazing talents that I have. I want to practice law. I want to run a company. I want to start a company. I want to run a foundation. And where does that take kind of, it's like a second part of your life. And what's wonderful about women in particular is that we are multidimensional and we can do both. And what I love what you said about childcare, which is so important, is like letting up on the guilt associated with having children and having a career that you love. And I suggest also that if you're going to have a career, make sure you love it. Make sure it gives you the energy that you need when you're going home at night. It energizes you. It makes you feel like it's okay that I'm doing this because it's important. It's important to me, and I think it's important to the space that I'm in. And so I'm going to do that job well, and I'm going to come home energized to my family because I'm feeling all these different sides of myself, and I'm going to have good childcare that I'm going to hire. I'm going to get other help that I may need that requires, to run a home, and it's just about finding the right mentors and role models that kind of give you not just like an idea or a hypothetical, but a real, actual visual of what that looks like.
Those are great answers, and there's no one-size-fits-all solution, like you were saying. It's about prioritization, and we were talking earlier about fixing the immovable peg. That's a calendar entry just like anyone else. It is not available anymore. Vanessa, there is a tendency to look at successful people in roles like yours and say, it was manifest destiny that you should arrive here, that you were naturally on a path that led to this with hard work, to be sure. But in reality, you've worked in both the public and private sector, as you mentioned. There were probably a whole lot of steering decisions that you made on the way to this side of the rainbow. So my question for you is, what is the toughest family versus career choice you were ever confronted with, and how did you go about deciding?
The toughest family versus career choice. I may have to get back to you on this one. I will say, I think I've been fortunate that I haven't really felt that much of a tug between family and career in terms of choices specifically, because as Toby said, as we've been discussing, once you figure out what your priority is, it's a lot easier to make those decisions. Recently, I had to make a decision whether to do some work travel for something that was rather important, or to be present for the last week of school for my sons, which those of us who are parents know that's when they have the school assemblies and all of those end of the year events. And that was toughish, but in the end I decided that I wasn't going to miss the last week of school. You know, for me, I always take a step back and think what's going to be most important to me, you know, 6 months from now, a year from now. The work conference, there will be others, and there will be other opportunities for me to network with the folks who I was going to be traveling with. But you don't get that moment back. You don't get the end of the third grade and sixth grade back, right? And so, so those are the types of choices that for me are not so difficult to make because I am very clear about where my priorities are. My job is important, my role, I'm incredibly honored to be in the role as U.S. Attorney, but there are certain things that I can pick and choose to do that don't take away from that responsibility and that obligation. And being present and being whole, coming to my family energized is a part of the larger picture of what we're doing in terms of trying to create safer communities, right? We want every home to be strengthened, including my own. And so for me, those types of decisions haven't really been that difficult over the course of my career. Some of the bigger decisions have been whether or not to pursue certain paths in the first place. And if I can take a step back, I will say that for me, you know, growing up as a child, I never imagined that I would be U.S. Attorney. I didn't even know what the U.S. Attorney was when I was a kid. I didn't know any attorneys in my neighborhood. I grew up in inner city Connecticut, inner city New Haven. Grew up, you know, without a lot of means, not seeing a lot of people doing professional work that I do in my community. And so it wasn't even in my mind that this was something that I would do one day. And the viewpoint of people in the community that I grew up in, where, you know, I grew up in the 80s and 90s, so it was the height of the crack epidemic, height of gun violence around the country, not just in the community that I was living in. And so people didn't look on law enforcement as friends, let's just say. There was a lot of trauma in the community associated with law enforcement. And so for me to now, so many years later, move into this role was something that I really had to make sure I understood how to communicate with the people from my community. A lot of people don't necessarily have positive images of prosecutors these days. And I was talking to one of the gentlemen who's sitting in the audience earlier about, you know, people's opinions of prosecutors versus public defenders and whether or not people think of prosecutors as being the bad guys. And for me, I think we wear the white hat. I think the prosecutor is the most important person in the criminal justice system because of the discretion we have to really decide which cases to bring in the first place, which charges to be included, which cases we're going to resolve without a trial. We have a lot of influence on the courts and the judges and what happens there. And, you know, what is our overall strategy and what's our priority? And so for me, being able to look at the work that we do from a victim protection standpoint is important as well. There are so many people we help. A lot of times there's focus on the negativity, but when you look at all the things that are going well, if someone is hurt outside of this building tonight, we'll hear that on the news, but all the people who are in this room who are going to get home safely tonight, we don't hear about. There's so much more positive. And for me, being able to make sure that I can convey that spin and move forward past that challenge in terms of being able to communicate that is something that I've sort of made peace with and become comfortable with. And for my sons to grow up knowing that their mother is part of leading the charge to help make the community safer for them from a law enforcement standpoint and otherwise is something that I think has driven home for me.
Thank you. That was a beautiful answer, and it's going to provoke me to go off script. So bear with me here. But you made a very interesting point about your professional role being a prosecutor.
Yes.
You have to decide to allocate scarce governmental resources to justice, and that's inevitably a values-based decision, right? And so I wanted to ask you, how do you connect to that with the motherhood side of your life? Are you successful because you're a mother, or in spite of the fact that you are?
I would say, I like your question too, the spectral question. I think it's probably a little bit of both. I think because I am a mother, I have a perspective on looking at, each child is different. And you look at each child as an individual in the same way that when I walk into a space like this and I'm interacting with people, you take care to think about each person as an individual, and you're connecting with each one in a different way. So I think a lot of that comes from being a mother. I mean, you learn so much more patience and empathy, and learn a little bit of a better skill for listening than I had before. I think the in spite of is a lot of times people think as working mothers that you're not going to have the time and attention to devote to your career, that things are not going to get done timely or done well. And if you are passionate about what you're doing, if you have employees working for you who are passionate about what they're doing, get some working mothers in there. People who want to do the work will get it done. Working mothers will put the kids to bed and get up and finish that project and have it done, not just done, but done well. I think that in spite of the fact that I have had additional work on my plate, I have continued to accomplish those things at the level and the standards that I think is appropriate. And those of us in the room who are type A's, I know there are some of you out there because I spoke to some of you. We know what those standards are for ourselves. And so when you're in competition with yourself because you're doing something you love, you will do that. You will get the work done regardless of the additional responsibilities of mothering. And sometimes you can be fortunate enough to blend them together.
Yeah, that's well said. I imagine that as you're sitting there, asking yourself the question, what malfeasance do I want to purge from this world the most in order for my kids to inherit it? Those are weighty decisions.
Yes.
And
too many answers.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'd like to pivot a little bit to choices and make unfair and incorrect inferences about your level of education, your intelligence, even your role in the home. And if so, how do you deal with it?
So, it's a great question, and what's so interesting about this question, frankly, is I grew up in Seattle. So I was raised among women, notably my grandmother, my mother's mother, and my father's mother. My mother's mother had a huge impact on me and my sisters, and quite frankly, all of us, my brothers as well. So this what you're talking about, this tension, what I like to call between, the traditional woman living in a modern world, really only became real for me when I moved to New Haven. And I'll tell you why. Because I grew up with, a grandmother who had survived the Holocaust and who had kind of like bypassed the whole kind of early American tension with American women, and kind of like this like roller coaster ride that they were on with like the first wave of feminism, and then like this kind of like post World War II, sort of like major dip that made way for the second wave. And so she bypassed all this. She comes from Europe, and she's all her vision of woman and possibility is like the enterprising and pragmatic woman in her life. And so she bypasses this, and she's before Betty Friedan's book even hits the shelves, she's negotiating bank loans for her company with her husband and dealing with the health board and citations, and known as Mrs. Weiss. And so that's my mother's, my maternal side of the family, and my father's side, whose mom was a first-generation American, her and her sisters had gone to, Eastern District High School, I think in Brooklyn, and were like top of their class, honor students, but at the same time were being educated for Jewish studies at Beis Yaakov, which was the school that was founded by this woman, Sarah Schneer, in Eastern Europe, and had made its way to the shores of America, and they were some of the first class, and so. But at the same time, my paternal grandmother, decided that although she had a license in learning how to with gemstones and had worked, during World War II, she decided she wanted to be a stay-at-home mom. And it wasn't until she was 37. She is a brilliant woman, and if you could see her high school notes, they're in Yiddish, Hebrew, and English, in the most magnificent script I've ever seen. And she was a meticulous student, and the reason I know this is because I actually have those notes, and I also have her notes that she did when she decided to become a teacher. She describes that she was 37 and she was walking down, the main drag in Brooklyn, and her friend from high school calls out to her by her last name, her maiden name. It's like, Pilchik, it's time for you to go to work. And she decided she was going to go work, and she went to go teach, and she taught till she was in her mid-70s. So I grew up among these women that were super confident, were very comfortable in their skin as women. And it wasn't until I came to New Haven, and I grew up in Seattle. Seattle's like this bohemian kind of like cushion of like women and just in general. In that time in the 70s and the 80s, and I get to New Haven in '97. I'm a fresh 20-year-old married, and it's for the first time I'm encountering this tension, and I didn't understand really at first what it was. And I'll be honest with you, primarily it was coming from women. And this kind of this judgment and this stereotyping and this, lot of this, it was condescending but well-intentioned. And what was interesting about it was all I can think of was like, at some point you're like, wow, should I insert my maiden name with my last name, my married name? Like, how was I going to navigate this? And what was interesting is that my mom, who had prepared me for my wedding and the laws of family purity, and she gave me all this kind of information about what would it be like moving to campus, being a married woman, and the laws that I keep, and I don't shake hands with men, and that was going to be an enigma to on campus, like this this woman's not shaking hands with men, and you can't touch her, and she's like so. I didn't expect it to this extent. She did not prepare me for this. So I don't think she could have been prepared. As a liberal arts university, very modern, very progressive, even in the late 90s. And so there was a moment where I could have thought, well, maybe I got to change this up a bit. And then I realized what the energy coming at me was so unhappy. And I said, why would I want to exchange 3,500 years of deeply woman rooted with deep convictions, across time and space, transcending culture, to get me to where I am today, in my comfortable skin as a woman, as an Orthodox Jewish woman, expecting my first child at 21. And I just want to shift for a minute to Adina. Adina was one of the first women I met when I moved to New Haven. And she was so wonderful and so kind, and it was like this juxtaposition between Adina, who was she, as you can see from what Amber said, she was the top of her class at Yale. When she graduated the Yale Law School, she was the one carrying the banner, which I know is a significant honor because I attended her graduation. And here was this woman who was just so welcoming and warm, and there was a distinct chilliness from other women like herself. And I really want to thank you for that, because that really paved the way for me to feel really comfortable, dig deeper in the comfort of my skin and in my tradition and my background. And so it is a tension, and ultimately at the end of the day, I think I've realized over time, and as I've evolved as a woman, as a traditional woman, and as a mother now of 2 young daughters, that I have a lot of empathy, because I think it was a really challenging time. And I think that not everybody experienced this kind of joyful childhood as a girl that I did, and as a young woman, where there was a complete equality in our household. We were 7 boys and 5 girls. We debated. argued over politics. My father loved engaging his daughters and still does. I mean, he'd rather argue with us even than sometimes my brothers. I mean, there was nothing I was told I couldn't do because I was a girl. And so, that's kind of stayed with me. And I felt and still do feel when I see women, and I still get these reactions. I still get these, supposed like this stereotype attitude about who I am, what I do, what I practice, even till this day. And genuinely, I have empathy at this point, because what I feel is that I am fortunate to have had such a wonderful experience as a girl merging into a young woman and into a young adult and into a woman and a mother that is rooted in something so far back and so deep and so rich. And that's what I tap into for my strength. And I'm so glad that I have that. And I think if women were happy, or anyone who, I guess, men or women who see an Orthodox, traditional Jewish woman, and there's a lot today that you can watch on different shows and get an idea, and it's, that's great. But and false, and
not
false,
always accurate,
and false,
right?
and what they don't, not only it's like the nuance, guys. It's all in the nuance. Don't just. There's so much there. There's so much richness and so much distinction, and why miss out on it? Why not but truly, if you were really happy, and I feel like if people were really happy where they were, they wouldn't be so resentful about what you represented. They wouldn't care. It was almost like I was an anathema when I first came to New Haven. I was like, "What? Like, who are you? You're just setting us back. You, Toby Hecht, you are setting all of womanhood back to the ancient, back to the arcane, back to back to the dungeons." So, and I felt really sorry because I didn't feel that way, and I felt sorry that they felt that way, and I think it spoke to who they were and where they were in their own lives, and had nothing to do with me, and still doesn't.
Great answer. It reminds me of the author whose name I'm forgetting, who said nobody can make you feel less than unless you give them permission, right? And it sounds like you anchored yourself in your traditions to be a bulwark in the face of some of that criticism you felt, emanating particularly from women, which is curious. So Vanessa, I'm going to spin that question over to you. Have you ever felt judged by women who have made different life choices than yourself?
Yes. It's interesting, though. I was listening to Toby, and how unfortunate that you had to feel that way on your arrival to New Haven. I'm sure you've built many more positive memories of the city that I still call home, although.
Oh, I love New
away.
Haven.
Right.
It was more like the Yale environment at the time.
Yes, exactly. And so when I think about the way women have sort of approached me, I will say mostly my interactions with other women are positive, very positive. I want to put that out there. But certainly there are times when I feel judged and have felt judged by women. Oftentimes, though, it's not necessarily the women who don't have children and are not doing the juggling, but sometimes it's by, the example I gave, by women who have made the decision to have children, but for some reason they haven't found enough of a work-life balance, and so there's some resentment that sometimes you feel like, how is it that you have figured out how to make this work and I haven't? And so when I sense that from people, sometimes I try and engage them in a conversation and offer some tidbits. But I think a lot of it is very personal, it's very individualized. It really is, I think Toby made a good point, a lot of it comes from your upbringing and what you see as your role as a woman, and who the examples are around you. I come from a very strong line of matriarchs as well, and so I had those examples of women who worked because they had no choice but to work and raise families, and figuring out trying to strike that balance. I like to think that I found a nicer balance than some of those women, even in my family, may have thought that I would be able to have at this point. I think we have to be willing to carve out to blaze that trail. You know, your introduction talked about you being a trailblazer, and I'm sure you could chime in on some of these experiences yourself with raising your daughters, your lovely daughters. You know, a lot of times you have to be willing to sort of carve out your own path and do something that maybe no one else has done before. And helping other people to come to you know, to understand that this is not something that's a negative against them. It's something that's beautiful for all of us as women overall. There were women who felt that they had to, for instance, start working part-time when they had their children, you know, generations before I arrived at the office. And when they saw that I was still working full-time with my children, it's like, how is this possible? You know, you're making the rest of us look bad because we pushed really hard on management to let us work part-time when we had our kids, and you're not doing that. But times have changed and people have changed, and I think it's great to have all of those options. Some people may choose to cut down, and, you know, depends on what your children's needs are. You know, I'm fortunate that my children don't have significant healthcare needs, but there are some parents who have children with significant healthcare needs, and they need more time to manage those things, as one example. So that's a long way of saying that, yes, it has happened. I try to figure out a way to engage people in conversation when I feel that, but sometimes it is sort of like, I don't want to bring the negativity into my space, and so I respect that, and I hear you there. I share that.
Both amazingly insightful answers. I want to talk about something you mentioned in passing earlier, Vanessa, about being in a male-dominated environment, right? You have police chiefs that report up to you that most, you know, are predominantly male, right? And you live in a male-dominated, a tough environment, you know, busting crime. That's not for the faint of heart. I'm going to channel my Yale English major here. There's a much written about passage in Shakespeare's Macbeth, where Lady Macbeth, when she is girding herself to commit the bold act of murdering King Duncan, and realizing that her husband Macbeth is too much of a wimp to do it, she says to her gods in this famous soliloquy, "Unsex me here. Unsex me here that I might commit this bold act of murder." So it is a bold act to commit murder, granted, but it's just as bold to hold those accountable who do. And that is part of your job, right, as U.S. attorney, at least from what I remember in law school. Some crimes, some murders are triable federally. I want to ask you, Vanessa, has there been a time in your career where you felt, in order to succeed and be taken seriously in the professional arena, that's male-dominated, you had to unsex yourself as a woman, to divest your femininity or hide or suppress it, suppress your wife and mother's side in order to just pull it off?
No. I'm not sure that I would be able to pull it off. That's a great question. I think there was a time when women going into the workforce felt like they were gendered in the sense that they were expected to wear skirts and pantyhose and shoes and dress similar to the way we're dressed now. And then there was a time when there was a big pushback, and you saw women wearing pantsuits as a sign of, you know, independence and resistance and feminism. And I wore pantsuits for a long time. When I was a younger attorney, I also wore skirt suits sometimes. And then I reached a point as I was moving into supervisory roles and management roles where I decided I was going to wear dresses and skirts and shoes and show up in all my femininity wherever I go, because I think it's important not to hide that. I think it's important that if I am the only woman sitting at the table in the boardroom, the conference room, or at the meeting, which very often happens, especially now in this role as you described, that they know that I'm in the room, that I'm here, and that I'm very comfortable with the fact that I'm a woman, but I'm also here to do a job. And you don't have to have, you know, the ability to lift 200 pounds of weight in order to make the tough decisions and do the tough things. And I think it's important not only for young women and young girls to see that, but I think it's also important for men and young men and young boys to see those examples as well. So yeah, I mean, I am a more conservative dresser, so I try not to dress in a way that would be considered sexy in the role, if you will. But I do think it's important to show up and be a woman, and I think it's fine for young women to feel that they can express themselves in that manner.
That's great.
Great answer.
Great.
And both of you have expressed this notion of just owning your identity, whatever that is. And it's like your best defense to the world. You just
Absolutely.
own it, and you stand proud, and you don't bury it, and you signal that to others, and they can only respect that. So these are great answers. I want to focus down my final few questions because I do want to give everyone in the audience a chance to ask what's their top of mind. So I'm going to make some judicious decisions here.
Sure.
But this is an important question, and I really want to make sure to ask it. It's about opportunity cost. So today, women have professional opportunities available to them that the previous generation of women simply did not. And each new generation pushes the equal opportunity frontier even further. However, as we all know, progress often comes at a cost. Has shattering the glass ceiling come at a cost to women? If yes, what have we lost? Or what are we in danger of losing if we're not mindful?
Take it first.
What say you, Toby?
Okay. So, it's a challenging question because there's so much important context that could be fleshed out. So, does anyone remember, I think in 2003, there was a New York Times article, and it became like this hype word called opting out. I remember reading it and thinking, wow, this is really powerful. And the baseline was that there were all these women in corporate, spaces as CEOs or leaders in industry who were suddenly deciding, and maybe even at the peak of their career, at some point that they were just like abandoning ship and they wanted to leave and start a family and find love, get married, and hadn't done that until now, or until then. And it was actually it was a fabulously written article. I loved it, and because I think it spoke to so much truth about the pressures and the progress and the shattering of the glass ceilings that really took women and gave them kind of all the sense of equality and opportunity that maybe they hadn't had. And that was still really developing. And although there had been the rallying cry in the 60s that merged into the 70s, there was still so much that needed to be fleshed out. It was this tremendous idea and this tremendous opportunity, but the architectural plans hadn't been completely drawn up yet. And I think that there was a moment there, perhaps in the 90s and the early 2000s, where there was a pause, and where you had a sense where, based on this article in the New York Times, where women were saying, wait a minute. I need to recalibrate. I need to rethink these choices that I've made, that kind of this trajectory, this path that I've been set on, this narrative that I've been told, the weight of the decisions I make that will either carry the next generation of women or not carry the next generation of women. There's this really intense, this kind of I think of it as these women leaving the arena, and there were a few women, and around the same time that this article comes out, there's a couple books, Closing the Leadership Gap, or Opting Out, or the reason for opting out, where women were pushing back at this kind of wholesale departure, or what it seemed like wholesale departure, because New York Times made it was such a fantastically bold article in a sense. And truth, I don't know how many women, I don't know what the statistics were. It wasn't as big as the article made it seem, but there was a movement, and there was a movement of sort of abdicating this role and this path that women had been set on. And it was a moment in time. And what was interesting about the book that, or some of the books, or the response to that was, hold up, women should, women need to, women should. And as reading it now and looking back and thinking about, looking at how women today are responding to the narrative that, that women had started to for the last several decades been on, and how the language has shifted, and how the need, the push for more has become almost like, I don't want to say a burden, but it's become more weightier than a lot of people, I think, feel that they can carry. And the problem is that the cost is today, if I could speak honestly, is that at some point, if you put women on a path, and by women that are leaders in industry, and therefore certainly have an authority, and certainly have the kind of ability to steer women based on who they are and the positions that they hold of influence. And if you say to them, you should, instead of you can, it puts a completely different emphasis on what they are going to do. And what I'm seeing, or what I think we are seeing, is that there is a breakdown. And so what is the breakdown? I think that when going back to the original comment, or the original question of leadership, is when women don't listen to their voice, or have or allow themselves to listen to that intuitive sense that they naturally have, and literally a gift that they have, and they push it aside in lieu of noise that surrounds them about what they should be doing or what they need to be doing. It's not even almost a matter of what they're worth, what is their self-worth, but what I think we're seeing is, who am I? What am I worth? What am I? That this identity that we talk about, that Vanessa speaks so strongly to, and is such an incredible role model for, and is this ability to define that, each woman for herself today, is what am I? The fact that it's not even, it's who am I? It's not even am I enough anymore? It's who am I? And I think, so that's the cost of pushing too hard without saying, there are many avenues on this path, and there are many choices. And so if we take women and we say, we're going to liberate you, but we're just going to confine you to another box, which is, you have to do this, you have to do this, in order for you to be of value, in order for you to really feel self-worth, this is where you have to go. It's just another form of confinement. Instead of saying, wow, look at all these options, look at the landscape you have. What can you do versus what should you do? And I think that was the cost, and that's a cost that we're seeing today, which is, can they hear it? Can young women hear themselves? Are women listening to themselves and what they want? Or have those very strong, deep, intuitive voices been silenced, for the collective voice of what we need to do?
So very, very thoughtful and interesting response. And what I'm hearing from you is that this social imperative to constantly drive forward and push and achieve more is actually the antithesis of liberation and not the definition of it. And so we have to be careful not to just jam ourselves into another box while freeing ourselves from a different one.
Right.
As we're coming to a close, Vanessa, I'm going to ask you, what advice would you offer to young women of today who are aspiring to be the next generation of women leaders and who want to have their shot at having it all?
Right. Something that we haven't already said, I agree completely with Toby about listening to your inner voice and figuring out what that inner voice is. When I was in college and even starting out as a young person, a young professional, I didn't really know what it was that I wanted to. I hadn't worked all those things out. And so I would say take the time, the same time that you devote to your professional studies, take the time to devote to your own personal life. And what is it that you want, 5-year plan, 10-year plan, whatever it is that you would do professionally, do that for your personal life as well. And I would just say, just keep in mind that there are no shortcuts. In order for you to aspire to certain roles, you have to put the work in. You have to learn how to perfect your craft, whatever it is. I tell law students all the time that, those first 3 to 5 years of practicing law are critical, because that's when you get all your foundational skills, and it's probably true in most other professions as well. When you're brand new, that's when everybody wants to help you and mentor you and give you that regular advice, and so you have to be putting the time and effort and energy in. And it doesn't really stop, even though we're talking about flexibility. I'm sure Toby will talk about all the work she's putting in, and sometimes it's late nights, and sometimes it's figuring out when to slide things in during the day in between other meetings. The work is always going to be there, but if you love what you do, bless you, if you love what you do, it's a labor of love. It's something that you're passionate about, and so for me, I don't ever feel like, oh my gosh, I have to do this work and this job. I love what I do. There are so many aspects of it that can be heavy and time consuming, and that's all great because it's a challenge that I embrace fully. When I am present with my children, I am present. The phone is off, the email's off. Everybody's on screens nowadays. When I walk in the door, I try to put all that stuff away until the kids are in bed. And I think we have to just make sure that we set those limits for ourselves. No one else is going to set them for you, and you don't get the time back. So those are my final words. Just set those limits, take the time to work on yourself, and find something you're passionate about and pursue it. And it may change over time. So you can pick something new in 2 or 3 years if you want. Yes.
So I want to thank both of our panelists for their wisdom, their candor, and their example in advancing and humanizing what it means to be a woman leader in today's changing world. Please join me in thanking our panelists. And with that, I'm happy to open up the floor to questions.
Gives me stage fright. Okay, so my question is kind of the converse of Adina's Shakespeare question, which is, just for backdrop. So you mentioned that Moshe was a male leader and Chava was a female leader, the first that came to your mind when you asked about who represents leadership for you. So Chava in the Torah is defined as, she's defined as an ezer kenegdo, which in English means a helpmate against him. So my question is, I guess to both of you, because it doesn't really presuppose biblical knowledge, but what does that mean to you, a helpmate against him? Toby, like Nechama Leibowitz, who's a female biblical scholar, has a whole slew of essays on defining it, and it's very beautiful, and I love that. But how would you interpret that phrase as Chava? And it seems to define her in opposition or spiritual opposition to her husband, to a man, not her husband, but to a man. And so is that the case, that a woman is defined by virtue of her spiritual opposition to a man in the context of marriage? And I like how Rebbetzin Lipsker in Bal Harbor, who's a Chabad Rebbetzin in Bal Harbor, calls unmarried women not yet married. She doesn't say she won't use the word single. She'll say not yet married. But so do you have to be, an ezer, a whole woman, like on your own before, or does that come out through your interaction as an ezer kenegdo in opposition to your helpmate? And I guess that doesn't have to be a man for the LGBT spectrum. I'm not on it, but just to be PC, does that come out as a kenegdo, in opposition, spiritual opposition to your partner? That's a very long question, but please answer how you like.
So an ezer kenegdo, so just to, for if you didn't hear the question, so Candace's question is, the term ezer kenegdo, which is how Chava, the first woman, is kind of defined, and I guess in parallel to Adam, which is like his helpmate, or his helpmate opposite him, or his helper opposite him. It's no, it doesn't mean opposite in that. I think the role of a husband and wife, in terms of how we see the first couple, is that they complement each other. And actually, Adam is actually created from dust, but Chava is actually taken from Adam, and which is why he's created from more of an earthy substance, and she's actually has that refined quality of being created from a human being. It's not ezer kenegdo in the sense of opposition, but I would say that they are distinct with it highlights the distinct qualities that men have and that women have, and when they come together, they complement each other when they want to, and that means they have the capacity to almost like merge, which is what they do. They merge by their different distinct qualities and act as a supporting role to each other in each of their functions as both man and both woman. And so it's not azer-kenegdo in the sense where it's like opposition as much as distinct and play specific parts and specific roles. And we see that, and personally, we see that, when you're married, you see the distinction in how you what you bring to the relationship and your ability to bring something to the relationship that the other one doesn't have, and that's how you complement each other. So does that answer your question? Do you want me to flesh it out a little bit more, or does that
does.
good?
Just the Hebrew word neged, maybe it's just a modern version of it, sounds like kind of...
Neged, opposite.
It's like, it has force behind it. It's like...
Right. So I don't see it that way. I see it as more as equal partners, as an opposite, meaning facing each other, versus, against each other in kind of like a tension. Not that there can't be a tension. When you don't use those properties, those qualities in the way that you can, there can be tension because you're distinct individuals, distinct humans created in a very distinct form. But I think it means the opportunity and the positive aspect of being two humans that coexist with different characteristics and qualities that they bring into the relationship.
Very good. Do you want to take a crack at that, or another question?
I
Moshe,
think that's a good
Chava,
answer.
any thoughts?
Yeah, we'll leave that.
Yes, in the front row.
Sure. First, I'm Caroline. I want to start off. I'm not going to stand up.
No, louder.
Oh, louder.
No,
Okay.
shout. Going back.
I want to start off by thanking you so much for this panel. I feel like this is a once-in-a-lifetime panel, and I feel so lucky that I get to be here. So my question is about, in both of your careers, in very, very different contexts, you work in environments where there's inherently a lot of disagreements, whether it's in law and government, it's so polarizing, or you're this intellectual circle on a college campus with highly diverse and opinionated college students. You both have been able to create this beneficial outcome out of those environments. So my question is, what has been your strategy for taking these conflict-ridden environments, whether they're like extremely conflict-ridden or subtly conflict-ridden, and framing them in such a productive way to get these incredible outcomes? What has been your strategy, and how has the specific experience of being a woman influenced that strategy?
I'll let you go.
Okay. I'll take the first crack at this one. I think that's an excellent question. I think that to start, I will just note that conflict is everywhere, and it doesn't always have to be negative. I think a lot of times we think of conflict as being negative, and it can be positive because of what you're talking about, helping it to produce something. When my strategy when I'm walking into a room where I anticipate that there will be conflict, because there always is some, but if I anticipate there will be a higher level of conflict than others, pre-planning is always important as a first strategy. I'm sure Toby would agree, the same approach. But thinking through and visualizing what is the space going to look like, what tension can I anticipate, and what strategies might I try to use to head that off up front? So that's number one. But then the second is when you start off a meeting or a convening like that, to set the tone in such a way that it reminds people to be respectful of one another, to be able to have, whether it's intellectual conversations or whether we're talking about a strategy for law enforcement and how we're going to approach a particular situation. There are always going to be a lot of strong personalities in the room at the table, most of the time when I'm in the room. So thinking about who do you think would feel most strongly about these issues, anticipating and being able to set the tone so that people, when people are speaking, everybody has a chance to voice their opinion. There may be some folks who have strong opinions but are less outspoken, making sure you draw out those opinions from those who may not be the loudest ones at the table. And just really taking the time to make sure that there's a lot of balance so that at the end of the day, whatever the goal of that convening or that meeting is, will come to the fore, right? You go in with an idea that I'm hoping to, that everybody will coalesce around this particular strategy. And so making sure that you give everybody a chance to weigh in on that, and that you press and that you push so that if there are strategies that you hadn't thought of or ideas you hadn't thought of yet, that those come to the table as well. So that's sort of the approach I take.
You want me to answer too? So I'm going to be honest, and I'm going to like continue this conversation of Ezer Kenegdo, because what we do up in New Haven, as you know, at our table at Shabtai, there's an enormous amount of curating and thought. We bring leaders from all different industry, and we really curate a very diverse, robust group of students from across campus and faculty, and we want to engage. It's really important to really dispel this idea of not allowing people to speak what's on their mind. But I will say this in terms of Ezer Kenegdo, that I have learned and benefited so much, because I am sometimes going to be a little vulnerable here, but I sometimes have a hard line. I'm not, as much as, I'm not using my long distance range that I really have sometimes. I sometimes stunt myself, and I'm very, very fortunate to be married to a man who has a pretty decent amount of intuition himself, and who has taught me the magic in really how we really build bridges, and how to even see that sometimes there are no need for bridges, and how we can really refine ourselves as human beings by getting down to like the almost like the baseline of who we all are on a cellular level. And I have to say that I'm fortunate to be married to a person who really exemplifies this in every way, and I've learned so much from my husband Shmuley in how to do that. And I think that having guidance and mentorships and being willing to evolve as a human being allows for these opportunities that Vanessa so beautifully showcases, and this is why she's a leader, and we're lucky and fortunate to have her here. Is to be able to do that, and it's not easy, and it takes a lot of thought, and it takes a lot of humility to be on my end to really say, look, I've got to do better in being able to what's the best way to get everyone's voice and everyone a seat at the table. So.
Thank you both.
I will add, having had some prep sessions with Vanessa and Toby, that they're both excellent listeners. For women who have so much of importance to say, I have to say it's a capital skill that both of you have, and I think that is very important in consensus building. That has to be part of your secret sauce.
Absolutely.
Great question. Thank you. In the back.
Younger women today, and during COVID, talk about the news media, talked about women dropping out of corporate America and saying we can't have it all. And I read an article today in the New York Times by Peter Coy about declining mental health among young people. And I worry about millennials, maybe Gen Z too, but about younger people and whether they can focus on traditional values and women in leadership and have a career outside, and what is happening, how can we help? Big question.
So the question was mental health.
Answer part, whatever part.
There we go. Should I take it? Can I take it?
You're doing like rock, paper, scissors here to figure out.
All right. I'll take a stab at it first. So I think, and I just want to paraphrase, if I can, your question first. So I think your question is with regard to mental health in particular for the next generation or generations upcoming, whether or not they can try and pursue a leadership role, a professional career, and have the family sphere as well. Is that?
Yes.
Okay. And I think the answer to that is yes. But I also think I want to go back to something that Toby and I were talking about earlier. Each person has to make their own decision. There are some women who say, I don't want any children, I don't want any spouse, I just want to be a single person, and I'm very perfectly happy being the single person. I just want to devote my life to my career. I think that's absolutely fine if that's what a person wants to do. There are some women who choose to work exclusively in the home, and they make that work and look lots of different ways. And I think that's fine too. I think that as a woman, just like men, we have a lot of men in our office, the upcoming generations, who are much more hands-on parents than men of my father's generation, right? They take parental leave when their kids are born. Sometimes they trade off with their spouse, and so they each get to extend the time home. I think that's a beautiful thing. And so as the person in charge of the office, I welcome that. I think it makes them better people, employees in the office. I think it makes better communities for us to have people engaged in that way. So my short answer to your question is yes, I think that women can have both. They have to think about what does that look like for them. What does childcare look like? If they want to have an active family life and an active life outside the home, and what industry does that look like for them, and does it match up with their passions?
So I'm just going to add one thing, because that was excellent, and I echo everything that you just said. I'll add one thing about mental health, and in particularly like on campus, what I'm seeing. So young men and women, both struggling a lot with their mental health, and there's a lot of masquerading. I mean, we spoke about masquerading, and a lot of what people are putting out there that looks like great and successful and, top of everything and doing all the extracurriculars, plus they're doing the double, triple majors. Everyone's great. So there's a lot of cracks, and it's to be honest, it's a big facade. And I'm not sure exactly what the answer is. I think we need to infuse more spirituality into young people's lives. I think they need to know that no matter what they choose to do, they are here for a purpose, and how they define that purpose may be a lifelong journey. I mean, there's a very big distinction between being successful and living a successful life. They're not the same thing at all. And I think that distinction really needs to be almost like there needs to be a class on what that means. And I think a lot of people are struggling. What does it mean to live a successful life? How do you even start? I've been so driven to be successful. I don't know what it means to live successfully. And what it boils down to is values and personal self-worth and the right kind of self-care, great role models. But what I'm hearing now even more, and this is not new, women who are choosing not to have children because for any sort of reason, but there's a lot of, what I'm seeing mostly is a lot of fear and a lot of self-doubt. And doubt and fear, it's a natural human experience. I mean, this is the human condition. We are always going to be struggling in some form or another. I think when I see a trend shifting where the struggling is becoming dominant to living, is when we have to rethink how we are shaping young people today and the things that are important in life. And so if a woman is choosing not to have children because that's really what she believes is one thing. If she's choosing not to have children because she's scared, or she's scared of what's going to happen to the planet, there's a lot of that now, and that's not new. That's been going on for several decades. The planet and overwhelming. And the truth is, I'm a woman of faith. I believe in divine providence. So much so that when you believe and you tap into that on a daily level, a lot of your fear goes away, and the burden and the weight that you carry kind of dissipates because you're like, you got it. But the reality is, and that's easier said than done. I'm talking about a lot of conceptual ideas for a lot of people today. Faith, God, spirituality, values, like how do you define what your values are? Like everyone is coming from so many different backgrounds, but fundamentally, I think this is how it can look. And I'll like use myself as an example, okay? I didn't always have it figured out, right? There's a lot of things that Vanessa and I were talking about all the things we juggle both as moms and as women and as women in leadership positions, and a lot of the choices that we have to make every day, and probably not enough sleep, and with a lot that we're carrying, and women do. We have that strength, and like we're like naturally able to carry a lot. But that doesn't mean that we don't doubt and both of us and feel like pulled in a few different directions. So a few years ago, I really had the wherewithal. I said, okay, let me break it down for myself, okay? Because even I struggle with that, right? We're pulling in which directions, and where am I gonna decide, and how am I gonna make these choices that sometimes seems like existential, right? Not just to me, but my family and my work that I love, all of which I love very much, and it defines me as I am happily. But at the same time, like I'm making significant choices in time management and in personal space. And so here's what I thought. I said, I'm going to use myself as an example so that it's not so conceptual. So I said, okay, what do I want? I'll tell you what I want, okay? I'm going to break it down. I want peace in my home, first and foremost, whether you're married or not married. Peace in your home. Your home is, there's a reason why the woman is called the Akara Sabayis, the homemaker, or the master of the home. And you know why she is? Is because it's such a hard idea that only a woman can convert it into a reality. Why? Because who can make a space like that, a place where you want to go home to at night? You've created a place where you want to go home, right? You want to go home to at night. It doesn't matter if you're married or not, or have children or not. It doesn't matter what age you are. Okay, so I want to create Shalom Bayis in my home. My husband is very important to me, and my relationship with him is very important. And nothing supersedes that. Okay. My children are very important. They are they're my proudest achievement, and they take the highest level. So nothing comes before them. I don't care what else I have to do. It's going to have to be tabled, and that is a hard balance to strike. And so I want peace in my home. I want a good relationship with my husband, and I'm going to do everything to make sure that I'm in it, and I'm doing what I need to do to make sure that that's working. And I'm in it for my children so that I know that they have all the tools they need, because I ain't going to be there all the time, and that's a really important thing for me. So I have to be deliberate in how I spend my time with them and without them, okay? When I'm with them and when I'm not with them. And I need to learn, because if I don't learn and I don't fill up my tank of what I love to learn, I don't have the energy, or I don't have the strength, or I don't have the wherewithal. So I have to pray. And I study Jewish mysticism every single day, because that gives me a sense of who I am, okay? So all of these things lead me to this. There's a certain weight that just leaves when I decided that this is what I want. So how things run in my home may not be perfect or as how I want them to be. How things run not in my home, at work. Can I make it to every event? No. Can I make it on time? No. And that is the choice that I'm making every day, because what do I want? I want peace in my home. I want a great relationship, invested relationship with my husband. And I want to be there for my children, and I want to invest in them, and I want to listen to them, and I want to try to be a better mother, which I'm trying to do every single day, because it doesn't ever stop, right? It doesn't ever stop. And we're constantly evolving because they're constantly evolving. That's what I want. So everything is going to surround what I want. So that's how it works. And it's hard. But when you do it and you continually remind yourself that this is what I want, I chose this, it just takes you to a whole different level of living.
A second part, just quick. Is that the values today are so different. Men, gay couples having kids, I mean, it's just so different. And these kids have so many choices and ways to live. So I think it's confusing.
It is.
That's my own, it's kind of like.
I agree.
They don't have role models like you. Necessarily, even in their own homes.
I think
It's
so,
so different
right.
today.
It
They
is.
have kids on their own and whatever.
But role modeling can take place anywhere and in any condition, under any circumstance. It's just, and as adults in the room, I think I take ownership of the mistakes I make. We're not infallible. We're human. And there is going to be this roller coaster that we're on, in kind of like asserting what we want. And that's okay. And so forgiving yourself for not being perfect or for not doing everything you want every time the way you want to do it, this is always tomorrow. Thank God we woke up for another day.
Well said.
How do we do? Okay, right on time. We stuck the landing.
Out of time?
All right.
Is it 3 hours from here?
All right. Well, thank you everyone for coming, and thank you for your thoughts. For those of us stuck in that horrible traffic, thank you to our panelists.
Thank you, everyone.